Good afternoon, participants. I would like to welcome everybody present to the webinar on alternative fuels, powering ships to a sustainable future, organized by the Belgian Ministry of Mobility and Transport and its partners. In 2018, IMO adopted an initial strategy on the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions from ships, setting out a vision which confirms IMO commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping and to phasing them out as soon as possible. The initial strategy identifies levels of ambition for the international shipping sector, such as decline in carbon intensity and greenhouse gas emissions. The IMO further notes that the global introduction of alternative fuels will be an integral part to achieve these overall ambitions. The webinar we are focusing today will outline various pilot projects on alternative fuels, focus on the required regulatory framework, and discuss the extended deployment of alternative fuels. Attention will also be given to some technological, regulatory, and logistical challenges, and this formed the point of view from different stakeholders. Following the presentations, there will be a short Q&A session with the distinguished speakers. Before all, to start off, I would like to draw your attention to a couple of house rules that will be published in the chat in this webinar. To please turn off your camera and microphones so they don't interfere with the webinar. Please note that this meeting will be recorded and will be made available through the program website, so you will be able to review it again. You will also be able to forward questions via the chat. However, these will be answered separately after the webinar has been finished, and the answers will be posted on our website. As you can see, we have quite a busy and diversified program for a duration of slightly more than 1 hour. And without further delay and ado, I would like to give the floor to our Minister, Mr. Van Quickenborne, Deputy Prime Minister of the North Sea and our host for today.
Ladies and gentlemen, in 2018, the IMO adopted a national strategy on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from ships, setting out a vision which confirms IMO's commitment to reducing emissions and to phasing them out as soon as possible. Shipping has been part of the discussion during the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow earlier this month, with pledges made by governments and private companies expected to drive changes in the supply chain as a whole. Because we need to act now. And the shipping industry also has to do its part to reduce carbon emissions and bring it down to zero by 2050. If we really want to transform the industry by 2050, then international regulation is paramount. There are many ways to reduce emissions from ships, but ultimately it has become clear that the global introduction of alternative fuels will be an essential part of achieving this ambition. Every member state of the IMO must take its responsibility, and we have to make this happen together, leaving no one behind. Every part of the logistical supply chain must be involved as well. The Belgian shipping companies are investing in research and development for new technologies such as hydrogen and ammonia. But our ports also have an important role to play and must provide the necessary infrastructure. And obviously, alternative energy suppliers are key partners in this. All of us have to work together, industry and regulators, to make these clean energy sources a viable alternative. The objective is set, and regulators need to allow the industry to develop and innovate in a safe and a sustainable manner. Policymakers must provide the necessary framework to make this possible. And because of its very nature, world trade needs international standards and international cooperation to ensure that alternative fuels become the global norm. Today, we want to share with you some of our experiences with alternative fuels and discuss with different frontrunners the necessary actions and possible pitfalls. It has become clear that there will not be one fit for all magical solution for the whole of the shipping sector, but a diverse array of options or combination of options are on the table. A lot of preconditions will need to be fulfilled outside of the shipping sector. For example, net zero carbon emissions through the use of alternative fuels will need a lot of green energy, for sure. Today, I'm speaking to you in my capacity as the Minister of the North Sea for Belgium, a country that has only 67 kilometers of shoreline. But we are transforming our North Sea into Belgium's most important source of clean energy. And despite our small share of North Sea territory, we are number 6 in the world in terms of offshore wind energy production. And that is in absolute numbers. And we have set ambitious goals for the future. We are already working now to triple that capacity by 2030. It will produce enough energy to provide every Belgian family with sufficient green power straight from the North Sea. And it will cut carbon emissions by 9 million tons. That's half the emission of all the cars currently driving on our roads. This provides that the potential for green energy in the world is enormous. And more investors are moving away from supporting fossil fuel projects to green financing. Ladies and gentlemen, the time to act is now. The government has its role to play in setting these goals and allowing entrepreneurs and businesses all across the globe to be the driving force of change and innovation in the world. Corporate collaboration and the active involvement of governments and regulators, not least the International Maritime Organization, is key to making zero-emission shipping commercially viable. We can provide a sustainable and environmentally friendly global trade. We can do this by working together, and you have a partner in my country, in Belgium, to help achieve this ambitious goal. Together, we can shape the future of shipping. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Our first speaker for this webinar will be Mrs. Els Kleijs, who will outline the Belgian policy initiatives. Els Kleijs is Head of Safety Environment Policy within the Belgium Directorate General Shipping since 2014. She started a career in the shipping sector more than 20 years ago and has held various positions within classification societies, shipping companies, EMSA, and federal public services. She currently represents Belgium at the IMO and is active as an IMSA's auditor. Els, I hand over the floor to you for outlining the Belgium policy initiatives.
Thank you, Bart, and a very good day to you all. I'm very pleased to be here with you today, just a couple of days before the start of MEPC 77 next week. Today, I will give you some insights in the policy initiatives taken by Belgium in the decarbonization of shipping. But let me start by saying why this is so important to us. Belgium has been a maritime nation for more than 190 years, and on an annual basis, 150,000 ships are passing the Belgian part of the North Sea. This includes south-north traffic transiting the Belgian waters, as well as ships on international routes to the Belgian ports such as Antwerp, Ghent, and Zeebrugge. The Belgian flag represents 127 ships with a total gross tonnage of more than 6 millions and a total deadweight tonnage of more than 9 millions. All major ship types are represented, such as oil tankers, bulk carriers, container ships, and also a significant dredger fleet. Belgium is a very densely populated country with a very dense traffic infrastructure. And this is because we are situated in the very heart of Europe, and we are also an important logistic hub. And to make all this work together, we support a sustainable shipping sector. And Belgium has always been very committed in the decarbonization of shipping. So after the Paris Agreement and the Tonne de Brum Declaration, Belgium launched the Brussels Declaration, the Ocean and Climate Change, which was eventually signed by 30 states, and which already made reference to the need for research and development and deployment of zero-emission fuels, as well as to the need of assistance to developing countries, mainly SIDS and LDCs. The Neo-Lakita High Ambition Declaration on Shipping furthermore emphasized the necessary transition to non-fossil fuels and the need for mid- and long-term measures incentivizing those fuels, including carbon pricing. Still, in 2019, the Getting to Zero Coalition was launched and was joined by several partners from our Belgium industry. We endorsed this initiative from industry to have commercially viable zero-emission vessels in trade by 2030. To give effect to these policy declarations, a national partnership was set up and developed a plan for sustainable shipping, which included as well the commitment for the further greening of shipping. It consists of a partnership agreement between the industry, government and political level, and lays down commitments between the Royal Belgian Ship Owners Association, DG Shipping and the Minister for North Sea. And I'm very pleased to see that also today these three levels are actively involved in our webinar, so thereby reconfirming their continued commitment. To effectively reduce emissions as soon and as quick as possible in Belgium, the National Energy and Climate Plan was set up, and this includes as well the objectives and measures to be taken by the shipping sector. It covers the years 2021 to 2030, and for shipping, it focuses on the investigation and implementation of mechanisms to ensure the transition to the use of carbon-free energy in the maritime sector at an international and a national level. Main principles when doing so are to respect the polluter pays principle and to maintain the level playing field. And because of the very international character of shipping, we believe that the best way to reach full decarbonization of shipping is through the development of international measures at the IMO. So for ships bigger than 5,000 gross ton, the national plan mainly refers to the development of measures at the IMO. And for ships smaller than 5,000 gross ton, we launched a study which was carried out by TML and which was finalized in March 2021, so earlier on this year. The study focused on the decarbonization of the Belgian maritime sector for small vessels, and the complete study can be found in our submission to MEPC 77 in INF paper number 2. Firstly, the estimations were made for the emissions of the ships in scope, and these included cargo ships, tankers, but also dredgers, tugs, fishing vessels, and pleasure craft. The study furthermore looked into ongoing public and private initiatives and most importantly examined the reduction potential and the feasibility of various measures for these ship types. The results of the study were based on a desktop study, a scientific analysis, but also from feedback received from the sectors in scope. And a part of the study was focusing on technical measures that could lead to reductions in the short term and could be introduced in the short term. But typically we were speaking there about reductions from 2 to 10% maximum and exceptionally 25%. And needless to say that to reach higher reduction potentials, the switch to alternative fuels has to be made. However, for these small vessels, the use of alternative fuels is not that evident. For example, if we look at the required storage volume and weight, but also to the involved high costs, these are still very important barriers and probably bigger barriers than for the bigger ships. Also, when we consider safety issues, for example, in the handling and the use of ammonia, this is very relevant and makes that it's, for example, not an option for the time being, at least on, for example, fishing vessels. On the other hand, these small ships usually have a lifetime which is typically longer than the bigger ships, and therefore the introduction of new technologies in the shipbuilding process should in fact start even sooner than for the bigger ships. Finally, the study also looked into some implementation measures to incentivize the uptake of new technologies. We looked at possible legal framework, but we also looked at the impact that regional and international measures would have on these small vessels. And this impact is quite significant. Therefore, again, it's very important that the IMO comes with a very clear message on what is the pathway to the full decarbonization of shipping. So this brings me back to the international level, and at the COP26, which was recently concluded in Glasgow, Belgium signed the Clydebank Declaration on Maritime Green Corridors. Together with our partners and industry, we will look further into possible routes to one or more of our ports where zero-emission ships could be introduced. And we believe that the introduction of zero-emission ships in the short term is very important to start the full decarbonization of the whole shipping sector. It is also important to stay on the pathway to the Paris Agreement temperature goals. And for the same reason, we believe that zero-emission shipping should be reached by 2050. To be able to do this, we will need many partners to realize this. And therefore, we are very happy to see that the call for action from the Global Maritime Forum has been signed by more than 160 companies. And those companies are not only shipping companies, but also ports, energy suppliers, and many more. So Belgium is very committed now to advocate for a more ambitious greenhouse gas strategy at the IMO for mid and long-term measures that make the transition to zero-emission shipping happen. As said, so the 2050 goal for zero-emission shipping is important for us. And we also believe that setting goals for 2030 and 2040 will give us more certainty to achieve that goal. Finally, but very importantly, because shipping is very international, but also climate change is very international, we believe that this transition should happen in an equitable and inclusive manner, and we believe that the IMO is the best place to do that. And that being said, I would like to conclude here. So thank you very much for hearing me out, and back to you, Bart. Thanks.
Thank you, Els, for your very comprehensive outline on the policy initiatives. It's now time to hear a bit the views and insights from various stakeholders in the industry, including ship owners, manufacturers, and recognized organizations. We're going to listen to a couple of projects, concrete projects, as well as specific efforts which have been made in relations to the use and development and deployment of alternative fuels specifically in the shipping industry. For a first concrete project on the use of alternative fuels, I'm now introducing Mr. Roy Kampe. Roy is Chief Technological Officer within the CMB Tech, the Cleantech division of CMB. CMB being a diversified shipping and logistical group based in Antwerp, Belgium, and owning more or less 139 seagoing vessels of very different types, and is an active developer and integrator for hydrogen solutions with a focus on engineering, hydrogen production, industrial and maritime applications. So basically the whole chain or involved with the hydrogen, use of hydrogen. Currently, Roy leads a team who is working on hydrogen-powered tugboats, coasters, CTVs, ferries, and on the necessary infrastructure to refuel these ships. Roy, you may take the lead, and I invite you to proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Helbroek. These are indeed challenging times currently, but also exciting, interesting times to be an engineer, because a lot is going to happen over the next 10 years. And please allow me to give you a quick fly through of the project that we are doing. So my name is Roy Kampe, and I'm happy to present you CMB Tech. So I have 5 topics to present over here. But I think the main story is we start small, but we scale up quite rapidly. Every 9 months, we double in size, we double in power, we double in storage. But first of all, who is CMB and why do we have a Cleantech division? Here you see our 4 sailing divisions, from bulk carriers, container ships, chemical tankers to crew transfer vessels, is that they all have a long lifetime, let's say 25 years. They cost a lot of money, but we know over the next 10 years it will change. So in order to make certain that we are building today vessels which are future-proof, we need to, let's say, take the lead and look at the energy transition. So therefore, we have founded the Cleantech division 6 years ago. So it's not only having the smart engineers, we're also building the ships, but not only on hydrogen, we're also looking into ammonia. So if you build new ships with a new fuel, of course, you also need to work on the infrastructure. It's always the chicken and the egg, so we have to aim at both. And then we see that the questions we have as an industry, as a shipping industry, these questions are quite similar in other industries. So that's why we have some side focus to look, for example, at transportation, because they can help us as well. If you have a container terminal equipped with hydrogen-powered let's say straddle carriers, forklifts, then it's quite obvious that that container terminal will also allow a coaster vessel to be refueled with hydrogen. And that's helping a lot to make the business case. If you look towards our technology, we use a combustion engine, quite known, and we believe that the heavy-duty diesel engines, these have, let's say, a long lifetime. These are expensive assets and they create a lot of emissions. So we think every kilogram we can save on emissions is one saved, and we should allowing these combustion technology to work on the clean fuels. So how does it work? We just aspirate the hydrogen molecule, we compress it as it is the tiniest molecule. It distributes quite uniquely, uniformly. We inject a tiny amount of diesel to kickstart that combustion process, and we have the temperature and heat which produces the power. If there is no hydrogen available, we can only inject the full diesel amount. And then also looking at the engines, you can easily swap to ammonia engine, because instead of aspirating hydrogen, you can also aspirate ammonia. Then if you look towards our applications, so we have our cooperation with ABC, which will be handled later on, but we also have some high-speed engines which we use for greening up our applications. If you look towards our scaling up story, we started with this 4 years ago with our Hydroville. We are proud that we started in 2017, but currently you can see, for example, this vessel is only sailing in Japan. It has a small, let's say, trailer on the back filled with hydrogen. So if it comes into the port, the trailer drives off towards a refueling station. The ferry takes another tour. When the vessel is back, the trailer is refueled, drives again on top of the vessel, and then it can continue sailing on hydrogen. This is, for example, one of our crew boats vessel. They also have been converted, and you can see in the middle there are like 3 stillages filled with hydrogen tanks, and we believe these are the customers already demanding for, let's say, ships running on clean fuels, because these ships are in fact the highest emission source for these offshore wind parks. But again, if you look towards scaling up, we are building a tugboat for the port of Antwerp. It has 2 medium-speed engines of 2 megawatt. And of course, we're scaling up further, because the first prototypes, the first ships will be for operation into ports. The next step will be in between these hotspots, like, for example, Port of Rotterdam, Port of Antwerp. I think the first vessels with coasters will be operating on a dual fuel system. And then, yeah, looking at the infrastructure, this is our first refueling station that can refuel also for ships. It has tube trailers which can drive everywhere in the port to refuel, for example, that tugboat. But these are the solutions we have to work on in order to make that energy transition. So I hope I have given you a quick fly through of what kind of projects we are working on, but please stay tuned. There's a lot of new projects to be developed quite soon. Thank you, Mr. Helbroek, for the opportunity presenting about CMB Tech.
Thank you, Roy, for highlighting this very interesting project on the use of hydrogen in maritime applications and all the logistical chain from production to the use of this alternative fuels. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Frederik van Uffel. Since 2016, Frederik van Uffel is Technical Director of EXMAR and responsible for the new building projects being developed by EXMAR for both the shipping and infrastructural division. He is also supporting the business development teams of EXMAR in the continuous search for new project opportunities. Furthermore, Frederik has been responsible as project manager or as technical director for several of the EXMAR new building projects. So looking forward to some new opportunities. Frederik, you may proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Bart, and thank you for the audience to be here. I hope to go quickly through some innovations which we have done over the past years and which we are proposing for the future, starting with LPG as a maritime transition fuel to ammonia as a maritime carbon neutral fuel. EXMAR is a gas shipping company. We own a fleet of around 4 LNG tankers and 33 LPG tankers with a focus on mid-sized gas carriers. And throughout the years, we have already achieved quite some significant reductions in CO2 or greenhouse gas footprint, as you can see on the graph on the right-hand side. Over the past 2 decades, we have been able to reduce the footprint from 100 to 80%. So we have saved 20% of CO2 emissions, focusing mostly on efficiency gains, so better propulsion power, better efficiency, better hull forms, and all those kind of things. But there is a limit to that. I mean, there are physical boundaries which you cannot breach when you put weights through the water. So the next step to have a more significant saving is to go to alternative fuels, and we take this step by step. First, we go to a fossil-based fuel, being LPG, which is giving us another 10% to 15% savings, with the end goal going to ammonia as fuel on those ships, which will lead to an almost zero emission. A very practical example of our first development as a fossil alternative fuel is our very large gas carriers Flanders Pioneer and Flanders Innovation, which are delivered this year. These are 88,000 cubic meter very large gas carriers transporting LPG over the world. These are the first in the world being LPG fueled. And to show you that it's not going all as fast as we would like to have it, this is a project which we started back in 2012. In 2012, we found our first ideas and we did an approval in principle on LPG as fuel. And it took up to 2018, where our clients, in this case being Equinor, saw an opportunity and saw the merit of having this alternative maritime fuel. We signed a contract in 2019, leading to the delivery of the ships this year. What we have achieved with those ships, and confirmed by the sea trial and by the actual sailing, we have been able to save 38.5% emissions of greenhouse gases, which is very important. We have an EEDI attained of 4.76. So compared to the IMO baseline EEDI, we have done a lot and we are best in class, and we're doing better as what is expected. This was our first primary goal. So of course, not only about CO2 and greenhouse gas, we don't have any SOx because LPG is sulfurless. We have a lower NOx, and of course we are compliant with Tier 3 using an SCR. Using LPG also ensures that you have 90% less particle emissions. This is not yet regulated, but it's also an important factor. So there is no soot, no PM being emitted, or very much less, of course. We also have no zero hydrocarbon slip because we operate our engines in diesel cycle. So all LPG, all hydrocarbons are properly burned. And what is also increasing the efficiency and lowering emissions is that we don't have bunker stops anymore. These ships can keep on sailing using their cargo directly as fuel. But that is, of course, only a first step. The next step, what we do and what we are now heavily working on, is to work on ammonia as fuel. And there we have selected our mid-size gas carrier as the first ship to be applied with ammonia as fuel. This will be a 41,000 cubic meter LPG carrier, ammonia carrier, of which we have 38,000 cubic meter as cargo and 3,000 cubic meter we will save as fuel for ammonia. As you can see, there's quite a lot of volume needed because indeed ammonia has a much lower calorific value compared with diesel or LPG. So that's a challenge but which we can overcome using deck tanks and to reserve space in our cargo tanks. What is very important is that we use an ammonia tanker or an LPG tanker as a base case, which is already in compliance with the IMO IGC code. So for this project is a perfect pioneering project for ammonia as fuel because we can see the ammonia fuel system simply as an add-on to the existing cargo handling system and the existing ammonia cargo system. All we need, and we are already in discussions, of course, with our Belgian flag, is an exemption from the administration, because indeed the cargo is toxic, and under the current IGC code we cannot use toxic cargo as fuel. But of course, using risk-based design principles, we will do our utmost to convince everybody that this is a safe way to proceed. In terms of timeline, we try to make this faster, much faster than the implementation for LPG as fuel. We have started last year. This year, 2021, we have received an approval in principle from Lloyd's Register for the entire fuel gas supply system on the ship and the ship design. Our basic design is, by the way, completed. Now we are actually a bit in holding mode, and we are waiting for the development of the engine. So engine makers are very hard working on having their engines available. We believe we can place the engine order in 2023 to have our ship sailing and construction completed on ammonia as fuel by mid-2025. We have a target to reduce our emissions or greenhouse gas footprint with 80 to 90%. We cannot go to zero yet. That is for the timeline 2030, but today, by 2025, we try to achieve that. It will depend on what the engine maker can achieve in terms of pilot fuel mixing with the ammonia. There will be no SOx emissions, there will be almost no particle matters. We'll be fully compliant with IMO Tier 3, again using NSCR. There is a lot to do about ammonia slip and nitrous oxides, which are also harmful for the environment, so we will do our utmost to reduce this to an absolute minimum, not jeopardizing the savings which we contemplate on CO2. And so also there we will install either the necessary catalyzers or even work with the combustion to make sure there is simply no creation of those emissions. And lastly, what is very important is the well-to-wake principle. I mean, it can be that if we all shift to ammonia as fuel, that we rather increase emissions compared to decreasing them, which is a very big threat on this development. That's why we as EXMAR, we look at the entire supply chain and we work with our customers, in this case Nutrien, which is a major ammonia producer, not to burn gray ammonia, which is made by methane cracking. No, we will use either blue ammonia to start with, which is ammonia where the CO2 emissions of the methane cracking have been captured and re-injected and stored forever. And it will be a step towards a green ammonia, which will be available hopefully later this decade using sun and wind power to create that via electrolysis. And we can do that. We are a part of that supply chain. We are shipping today already 2.5 million tons of ammonia per year. We're doing this since 3 decades. So that position in the supply chain combined with our experienced crew, our experience of people in the office, we believe this is a perfect example, a perfect test case on how we can lead the industry towards a more leaner and lower emission footprint and to work towards a 2050 goal of 0 carbon emissions. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you for having this opportunity to present here. Back to you, Bart.
Thank you. Thank you, Frederick, for highlighting the transition from fossil fuels to non-carbon fuels such as ammonia, and which is definitely one of the important alternative fuels we are looking to for the foreseeing future. Now, from another perspective, the manufacturers also play an important role in the switch to alternative fuels, providing technological solutions to the transport sector. For our next speaker is Tim Bergmoes. He's CEO of Anglo-Belgian Corporation in Ghent, Belgium. Under the leadership of Tim, ABC has grown to a world-leading engine manufacturer with a focus on sustainability. ABC invests largely in the research and development of engines suitable for a range of alternative fuels in the maritime industry, but also diversified in other sectors, particularly transport and energy sectors. Tim, without any delay, the floor is yours, and looking forward.
Thank you very much, Bart, for this nice introduction, and thank you for the audience to attend this nice webinar. I will just shortly introduce you to ABC. We are a medium-speed engine builder. We are located in Belgium. We have 2 foundries in France, 2 in Germany, and 1 turbocharger manufacturer in Germany. We have a future as combustion engine builder. We are more than 100 years old, and we believe in future fuels, together with combustion engines, same as Roy explained you in his presentation. So we can give full power with 0 emissions, and we will explain you how. Our engine range is from, let's say, about 800 kilowatts up to 10 to 12 megawatt engines in, let's say, 600 RPM, over 750, 900 up to 1000 RPM. We have world-class customers. We have inland vessels, of course, but we also have a lot of fishing clients. We have tugboat applications. We have ferries with CNG, hybrid, solar panels. We have polar cruisers. We have windmill installation vessels, but also navy vessels, coasters, and a lot of windmill installation, which is now very popular with heavy lifting equipment, but also other sectors such as locomotive business, power generation together with solar panel, hybrid generation, and we also have nuclear emergency gensets, for example, for ADF. We believe in production in Europe, but also production within the energy transition. We have our own production facilities here in Ghent. We have solar panels. We have own engine production energy. We are connected to a heat system to join the heat with the community around ABC. And we are also expanding the factory with another 5 hectares with a new transition project where we want to show close to the city to maybe have off-grid production and energy production. Which are now the developments where ABC is focusing on? Well, first of all, we still have the good old diesel engines, which can burn diesel, but also heavy fuel and marine diesel oil, with a very performant after-treatment system. I explain in more detail. This means SCR technology, so DENOX with urea injection, but also particle filters. We have introduced now and developed within our group particle filters to also filter out ultra-fine particles. So you can get the ultra-low emission vessel notation from classification with this after-treatment systems. On the new fuels, we have also a focus on methanol. We join together with the Fast Water project, which is a European subvention. We have now an engine range from 1 megawatt up to 2.5 megawatt as dual fuel engine on methanol. Methanol is being one of the future fuels in dredging sector, in many ferry sectors, and so on. So we also focus on methanol as future fuel. Then, as already Roy explained in his nice presentation, we have a joint venture with CMB, which is BeHydro. So we produce hydrogen engines as dual fuel, but also as 100% spark ignited fuel in the same power range from 1 megawatt up to 2.5 megawatt. And this I want to emphasize. With combustion engines, we can have 0 emissions. The 100% hydrogen engine with pre-chamber and spark ignition has no CO2, no NOx, no hydrocarbons, no CO, and no particles. So it is really 0 emission, and it can have quick acceleration in power. It is 3 times lower investment than fuel cells, and the lifetime is 10 times longer. So we believe strongly in this combustion engine with future fuels. Next to that, we also develop digital twins to advise our clients in this quite complex environment about new regulations, emission rules, fuels with heat capacities, combustion speeds, which are different. So our ambition is to help our clients making the right choices for emission after treatment and fuels, depending on their specific application. But we face also some issues. And there I want to use this opportunity to explain a little bit our point of view on the challenges we might have together and where we can work together. On the emission regulation, the certification process is quite complex, quite long, and quite expensive for, let's say, small and pilot projects. So altogether, I think Frederik also mentioned that we need to have an open view to permit innovation to go more quick, and that the certification is not breaking the process of innovation. Also, it's a big challenge that the IMO has different rules than EPA, than EU regulations or inland water navigation CCR. As a manufacturer, it is quite complex to have all these different regulations with all different process parameters, with all different criteria, with sometimes different test equipment to satisfy to all this diversity of regulations. And then also time stability. We don't need, let's say, new regulations coming into force almost the day after the first one has been coming into force. So we need really stability on the emission side. Well, one of our solutions would be to have NOx measurement and particle filter monitoring, and then you can monitor really very accurately the process and you have a safe and reliable operation. The other points I just go quick: availability of CO2 fuels, CO2 neutral fuels, sorry. Hydrogen infrastructure, it is a need to increase this. And then green energy. Of course, there's no green fuel if there's no more green energy. We need extra capacity. Then safety, I think the Bureau Veritas and Lloyds will also present. Also, they have to speed up the process of know-how in these new sectors. And then a suggestion from our side: retrofits, please accept clients to retrofit their existing engines and not to force them to go to EU stage 5, which is very expensive and quite difficult to integrate the volume. Let clients make a retrofit to methanol or hydrogen without having to put all the after treatment systems. It will help to go quicker in the CO2 reduction. Just some applications which we do together with Roy and his team. We are also changing locomotives from diesel up to hydrogen. We have this nice hydrotug project in the port of Antwerp, but we also have ambitions for more rail projects, for power generation, for push boats, and for cold ironing. So my last point is we have used the opportunity in Europort in Rotterdam to present our complete new Evolve range. Just for your information, this engine is possible to burn all liquid fuels and all gas fuels. So it can burn LNG, it can burn CNG, but also hydrogen, it can burn methanol, and it can also burn diesel, biodiesel, and other liquid fuels such as heavy fuel. So we, from our side, as engine builder, as engine manufacturer, we are ready today for a hydrogen economy, and we would like that everybody can join this process. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Bart. Back to you.
Thank you, Tim, for showing us the possibilities, but also the challenges involved with alternative fuels, particularly in combustion engines, showing us also that combustion engines also have a role to play in the use of these alternative fuels. Now, the deployment of alternative fuels in the maritime industry cannot be achieved without the availability and the necessary technical support. Based on their experience and knowledge, recognized organizations play a crucial role in ensuring the transition to alternative fuels. That these use of alternative fuels remain within the safety thresholds set by the IMO. Their views should also be taken into account. Our first speaker is Peter van der Graaf. Having started his career as a chief engineer on board ships, joined Lloyd's Register in 1989. Since 1st of July 2021, he took the role of decarbonization business development manager, supporting projects and clients in the North Europe. Since 2012, Peter has been involved in several projects with alternative fuels, LPG, hydrogen, methanol, and approvals in principle for ammonia. Peter, looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter van der Graaf. I work at Lloyd's Register, and I will give a short overview on alternative fuels and how we deal in times of where prescriptive rules are not available. Every kilogram of greenhouse gas reduction is a good kilogram. Therefore, one of the solutions is alternative fuels. The following alternative fuels are considered, with some already materialized. We have ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, ethanol. We talk about liquid organic hydrogen carriers as a carrier and as a fuel, biofuels, LPG, LNG, electricity, nuclear is around. They can all originate from different sources. Green energy, fossil fuels, some will be provided as e-fuels. Most of these fuels are used or will be used in conjunction with internal combustion engines, fuel cells, hybrid electric configurations, and also pre-treatment of fuels and after treatment of exhaust gases have to be considered. At this moment, technologies are validated and they come along as and if considered safe. All the alternative fuels have their pros and their cons, and some have perception as an additional disadvantage. All have minimum one pro, a limited or a larger impact on the environment. With some of these alternative fuels, there are challenges to overcome, as fuel properties towards health, volume, safety, use of materials. The goal is to ensure that the level of safety for the new fuels is equivalent to the level of safety associated with fuel oil. The question is, how do we do this in the absence of prescriptive ruling? We have the IGF code, we have the IGC code, we have SOLAS. All these codes are making reference and giving guidance how to deal with alternatives, so also with alternative fuels, and this on a risk-based method. Classification societies have ruling in place for some of the alternative fuels. In their existing ruling, there is availability to accept risk-based design, as also indicated in the mentioned IMO codes. As mentioned before, the risk-based approach is required to ensure that the level of safety for the new fuels is equivalent to the level of safety for the associated with oil fuels. One mechanism of demonstrating equivalence with SOLAS alternative designs and arrangements is using risk-based techniques, as also indicated in the IGF code. Risk-based design guidance is also provided in the MSA Circular 1455. This document has been translated by LR in a shipwright procedure called risk-based certification, earlier named risk-based design. During the risk assessment, the design will be questioned on the effect of events. For example, fuel tank position versus different impacts like being collision, dropped objects, fire, explosion, and leakage. If the risk is found unacceptable, additional measures or design changes are needed. Quick overview over the risk-based certification scheme. A design and safety statement is prepared by owners, designers, shipyards, makers. It's followed by a risk assessment on documentation made available. During the risk assessment, some risk may be notified, and then supporting studies are required to look for mitigation of the risk by additional features or by changing of design. In the fourth step, the final design will be reviewed again to see if the mitigating measures and the design changes are sufficient to call it a safe design. Additionally, we have added a fifth point that means that even that already in this stage, we will be looking at the initial testing required for the new alternative fuel to be implemented on the vessel. Same-wise, we will look at the future requirements for service to be carried out on these vessels when they are in service. I have listed some Belgium-related projects with alternative fuels for your info. All these projects have been dealt with on a risk-based, as a risk-based design. We have also provided vessels which are methanol fueled. There are approval and principles for several types of vessels around the world. And also we have ongoing project in the inland waterway industry, which is also quite important for our regions. Also, yachts are finding the way to alternative designs and fuels. So to conclude, yes, there are many options for decarbonization through alternative fuels. The use of alternative fuels is regulated. Except for LNG, there is no full prescriptive rules available, as all the prescriptive rules are referring to risk-based design. Research and validation of technologies is going on and need to be safe. And finally, collaborations at all levels is required. Together, we can unlock the potential of alternative fuels in maritime. I would thank you for listening, and thank you, Bart, for having me this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for all your efforts so far in supporting the deployment of alternative fuels, which sure is a key activity in this process. Also from recognized organizations, our second speaker will be Marshall Claude-Pierre, Marshall Claude-Pierre. Marshall holds the position of Global Market Leader, Sustainable Shipping, at Bureau Veritas Marine and Offshore, head of an expert team developing sustainability portfolio of BV regarding strategic transformation on decarbonization of shipping, alternative fuels and propulsion system, with a focus on ammonia as fuel, electrification of shipping, and wind-assisted propulsion. Marshall, please proceed. Marcel.
Thank you very much, Bart. Thank you for this invitation. I'm very honored to be here today and very pleased to be part of this very high-level, exciting team. So, in brief, our view in Bureau Veritas is to create trust. So, create trust. I'm sorry, cannot switch off the slide. Okay. So we create trust, meaning that we, as a classification society, we endeavor the new technology to be scaling up and fuel to meet the performance requirement or objective that are targeted by our client on all the industry in the shipping industry. We want also with this trust to make sure that any associated risks are identified, and critically, we want also to make sure that how such risks are addressed, in order to mitigate the associated risk to a new alternative fuel. On this first slide, you can see that we are running already all these different roles, and we have now, you can see in this slide, we have delivered this approval in principle for ammonia fuel, ammonia carrier. So we have this background of regulation. This is how it is today. We have a high pressure from the regulation. So we, of course, are part of it. Our role ultimately is to allow the development of a new class role as well as supporting the development of regulation. This is how we see our, let's say, our participation to this race for decarbonization. So here you can see that we have different stage where we intervene. we create our own rules when there is identified gap or when there is missing rules. And certainly we don't necessarily pick up, let's say, a specific solution, but we help a stakeholder to make the best commercial and operational decision based on the technical insights that we can provide. So to that point, we are also participating to the major moves that are taking place today. We are part of the Hydrogen Council in order to be in the heart of this change in terms of fuel and energy. And I would like now to also focus on the existing situation. So as already described, we have to deal with existing regulation, and we have to accompany the IMO effort to adapt, modify, complete, change this existing regulation in order to accept, welcome on board all the new candidates as alternative fuel. For the time being, all the projects that we have are dealt with risk analysis and alternative design. But let's focus on, let's say, on a very specific and a very, let's say, rational approach. We have delivered specific rules for ammonia fuel, so this is an example. We have also either rules addressing hydrogen, methanol as a fuel, but ammonia maybe is one of the, which is on the stage today. So we have delivered this rule simply because there is a need. There is a need from the industry. We have seen very exciting projects, so we need to accompany those projects. And when we have to deliver, for example, a risk analysis, we need a regulatory background. That's why we have developed, with the help of the industry, these absolutely new rules for ammonia fuel with new devices. So this is all about technology today. We are going to reach IMO target only if we are able to deliver a new technology, and if we are able to, of course, accompany this new technology with a dedicated specific rules. So here, an example of work which is done with a large consortium of the industry, with some key players from Belgium here. In Belgium, shipping industry are present here in this consortium with MAN two-stroke ammonia new engine. And we have delivered this ASOP risk analysis back in September this year. Few other projects that we are ending now. Ammonia carrier with ammonia fuel with a large shipyard in Korea. Interestingly, a possibility to transform and to change over the fuel of an existing vessel running on LNG to be running on ammonia later on. And we have also, of course, delivered some approval in principle for equipment manufacturers such as GTT membrane tank. But I would like just to focus on this point of bunkering. It has been touched upon just as a weakening point, actually. We have now to, as a class, to be part of it, to make sure that the weaker link, which is a bunkering of ammonia in that case, but can be also hydrogen, is managed and is mastered. In terms of safety, we have to make sure that the safety is attained, but we have a completely different risk profile compared to LNG, for example. LNG and ammonia are completely different risks, and so we have to make a kind of global approach with the main stakeholder, and that's why we are very active in SGMF work now, and within the ITO2 work also. We are seriously taking into account and work on solution for ammonia bunkering in CMOP, simultaneous operation, and in the right center of commercial port. So I would like to conclude on my presentation by saying that all the presentation are focused on fuel. That's true, but we believe in BV that in Bureau Veritas that the future of sustainable shipping is about much more than fuel. And I would like also to mention wind propulsion system, for example, which is a very low freight hanging that can be catch easily. And we are also working on that part of the solution. So with that, I would like to conclude and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Martial, for sharing the support as an RO in the use of ammonia, but also, as you rightly say, in other possibilities and means available. Okay, to round up the previous presentations from different stakeholders in the use of alternative fuels, it's also important to hear the expectations from the shipping industry, from the ship owners towards governments and industry in view to further facilitate the use of alternative fuels. Our next speaker, Mrs. Helene Schmidt, represents the Royal Belgium Shipowner Association, where she follows up on topics related to maritime innovation and sustainable finance. To maritime innovation and sustainable within Belgium, the Belgian Shipowners Association, she leads the Maritime Industry Decarbonization Council, a think tank that brings together stakeholders from the entire maritime value chain to share technological knowledge from ongoing projects. Hélène, please take the floor. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. It's a real honor to be here today with you all. So when you're discussing the fuels of the future for maritime, it's important to make a distinction between the new builds and the existing fleet. Our industry's ambition is to have the first zero-emission large maritime vessels market-ready by 2030. And so our first concern that comes to mind is, will these alternative fuels be available? Since we cannot be sure that the answer to that question is yes, our vessels will need to be equipped with dual or even tri/multi-fuel engines, as Tim from ABC just mentioned, so they are flexible when availability falls short. And since 2030 is still a couple of years away, we should not underestimate the role that transition fuels such as LNG and LPG can still play. As we are all aware of, LNG has received a bad connotation over the years because of the methane slip in certain engine types. That is why we urgently need restrictions on the emission levels of methane slip, get these lower performing engines out of the market and restore the reputation of LNG as a fuel. When it comes to the existing fleet, it is important to take into account the average lifetime of a vessel in combination with the fact that an engine cannot simply be replaced as easily as the old refrigerator in our kitchens. That is why, for these vessels, alternative and low-carbon fuels can play a role by being blended with the conventional fuels up to a certain amount so that they can still be used in the existing engines. To make this fuel switch work, there are 5 critical pillars. Number 1, fuel availability. Without a steady supply of green fuels, we can never reach our zero-emission ambition. Second, fuel quality. Especially when it comes to blending of fuels, we need better and more detailed ISO standards. We saw so many of our engines breaking down when the low sulfur fuel regulations came into place, and as we hear from our members, especially now that the temperatures are starting to drop again, this issue is still present. Third, life cycle assessment of fuels, meaning tank to wake and well to tank. It is quite obvious that an alternative fuel should be produced in the cleanest way possible and that the ship owner can be sure that whether the fuel is produced in Europe or, for example, Brazil, the same norms will be applied. Safety. Also a very important one, to taking into account the toxicity and flammability of some of the new fuels. And then last but not least, the price tag that comes along with these new fuels. Will conventional fuels become more expensive by, for example, imposing a carbon tax, or will the new fuels be subsidized in a way, like the carbon contracts for difference that Europe is currently looking at under its innovation fund? One thing is sure, these pillars can only stand strong if they are supported by international regulation and, of course, in close collaboration with the industry. We have the knowledge, we want to share the knowledge, and we want to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Hélène, for sharing your vision on the expectations for the ship owners. I think it's very clear what is necessary for the shipping industry to move ahead and what is expected to proceed with these alternative fuels and to reach the environmental goals which have been set. Thank you all to the speakers for sharing all this information and giving such a nice and very interesting presentations. Which, of course, it's a very extensive and comprehensive subject, the alternative fuels, and much more has to be said about the deployment and use of these alternative fuels. But let's move to a second phase to this this webinar, being a bit more interactive. So despite all the valuable information that has been provided from the distinguished speakers, it's always good to have an opportunity to pose some open questions, to share views, insights, visions toward the future on their experience so far with the use of alternative fuels. And this may give us a glimpse on what the way forward would be and the challenge which are to be overcome. Again, for the participants, you are still welcome to send your questions through the chat. They will be answered after this webinar. So we will, unfortunately, we are limited to deal with a limited number of questions, but not during the webinar itself. So without any delay, let's get started with a couple of questions for the different stakeholders which have been present today, and then to discuss. So the first question to be asked to the ship owners, which we had two present during this webinar, would be the question: is that from a ship owner's point of view, what is required from the other maritime stakeholders, such as maritime policymakers, ports, charters, and suppliers, to facilitate the further deployment of alternative fuels on a larger scale? So maybe I can ask this question first to Mr. Roy Camper from CMB Tech, what his views and opinion is regarding this question.
Yeah, well, I think it would help to standardize, meaning that we have now, for example, experience within 4, let's say, ports on how to bunker with hydrogen. The approach for these 4 ports was totally different, going from one with 3 or 4 safety studies, audits, to somebody else that, it's CMB, please go ahead. Is that also, I think, on, let's say, standardization on the storage of hydrogen molecules? I think it would help that there is some kind of framework which is being discussed at a higher level, that once we have an approval for one port, automatically the others follow on these same principles. That would help us.
So I understand this would be a kind of, I would say, demand of requests of expectation for some level of harmonization, of mutual reciprocity, reciprocal recognition, which would be
Correct.
Definitely facilitating the deployment of the alternative fuels.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pose the same question towards Mr. Van Nuffel. Frederik, the same question would be: what is your point of view from a ship owner? What is required from, let's say, other stakeholders in the industry on ports, charters, policy makers on to facilitate the further deployment? How are you looking to that aspect?
Yeah, thank you. I think today one of the biggest challenges is with the policymakers. I think in terms of equipment, ship owners, ports, facilities can be made available. But the question today is more which facilities. I mean, there are, as we have seen today, many options. You have ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, others. And it's very difficult for a ship owner to choose one or to pick one. The policy today is a bit scattered around. There is no clear target where we go to. And the shift to alternative fuels today is not an economical shift. It's not more economical to go to an alternative fuel. It's more expensive. So that's why it's driven rather by policy today than by economics. So that's why policy is very important. And we need very clear goals and very stable policy making, preferably from IMO on a worldwide scale, to make sure that the right targets are being set. And as also already mentioned by Mr. Berkmoes, these targets have to be set on a very long timeline, because the decisions which we make today are still there in 20 years from now, or ships run 20, 25, 30 years. So, and it's a very, very big risk that because of the lack of strong and straightforward long-term policy, that any decision which we take now as a ship owner on an alternative fuel might be the wrong decision. If we decide today on ammonia and the world turns to hydrogen, then we have a very big problem as a ship owner, and that's a risk which you don't want to take. So what will happen is that no decisions will be taken, and we will keep on running with the ships as they are, which would be not very good in terms of the environment. So that's we have to avoid. So that would be my call to policymakers, and especially to IMO, to have a very clear target agreed by everybody with a very long timeline, and not changing rules every 2-3 years, but a long-term vision on where you want to go to with the shipping industry.
Thank you very much for your views and your clarification on this question, which I also clearly note a clear signal towards the policymakers that clear goals are required, clear targets, and a long timeline, which enables also for ship owners to carry out the correct investments with a clear pathway towards what is expected, and there's no, let's say, later on changes that would jeopardize all the investments which have been made. So I understand also that the sector is prepared to invest, but when investing, clarity is of course an essential part, and a clear vision from which is also globally accepted. That is important. Thank you. Thank you very much for your answers, which are definitely important to note and to share also with all the participants. I'm moving to another of the stakeholders who see what their views is about. So I'm going to pose another question, but now directed to the engine manufacturers. So I would like to ask a question to ABC, to Mr. Berkmoes. Engine manufacturers are at the very basis of research and development, and at the same time very dependent on rule development. From this perspective, what would your message be to the policy developers, taking into account already what you have stated at your last part of your presentation? What would your concrete message would be to the policy developers?
Well, in any case, I want to support the good answers from Frederik and Roy. We need worldwide regulations like IMO to have one standard, one path forward with a very clear timeline. Second, we think we need some open mind towards pilot projects. It is much too difficult to have regulations approving pilot projects. I think everybody is working very hard. The industry, the ship owners, the fuel sector, the administrations, but we need some open mind toward pilot projects who want to reduce CO2 emissions on short term, that the certification process can be somewhere more flexible and more quick. And then last point, which I also already mentioned a little bit in my presentation, is the retrofit possibility. I think there is a big existing fleet. The lifetime of ships is very long. The urgency is very high. So if we can open an option for ship owners to come to retrofits within an economical return on investment, I would say, why not do it? So why force a ship owner to comply with the newest regulations if it is not economically feasible? It will not happen. So make some intermediate standard where they can switch over to new fuels, but with some intermediate stage, and then the momentum will be much higher. So that would be my personal views on potential improvement on regulation and policy makers.
Thank you very much, Tim, for your very clear view. So, which is in line with what you have discussed during the presentation. So clearly, the open mind aspect is of great importance, specifically for those in pilot projects for propulsion systems. And also, this flexibility on certification is also indeed sometimes a tedious process, which needs a bit of a more pragmatic and a more simplified way. And finally, this retrofit issue is also indeed a very important, taking into account the urgency of the goals to achieve. And if we want to reach indeed these targets set by the IMO, it's indeed there should be also kind of way forward or path for retrofitting. Thank you very much for all your views so far. That leaves me, and finally, to those who are highly supporting all these initiatives of the industry changing to alternative fuels. So we are moving to the recognized organizations who have indeed a very important supporting role in the development process. So also interesting to hear their views. So also I'm going to pose a little question to get a more inside view of their vision. So what is considering that the issue of ships powered by alternative fuels is a very technical issue, I believe it's correct to say that the RO have an important role to play, considering their ownership of technical expertise. So how do classification societies see their role and the challenges in the future deployment of alternative fuels? So I would leave first the word to Mr. Peter van der Graaf to share with us what his opinion and views are in relation to this question.
Thank you, Bart, for the question. I think the role of the ROs is to support innovation and especially the use of alternative fuels. With the tools we have at this moment available in the IMO codes and the present regulations that are available, and this to come by the use of our technical knowledge and the existing standards to safe solutions, which initially will be risk-based approach, and at later by prescriptive ruling and future IMO requirements. One thing is important that for some of the new fuels, of the alternative fuels, there is already existing standards also on the shore-based side, and maritime business should look at applying these standards, see if they are feasible to be adapted to the shipping industry. The classification societies have a role in the full approval and in the design of the risk assessment, and in the design, full approval of the design and in risk assessments. So separation of these responsibilities within our organizations is a requirement for risk-based designs. So to underline the importance of the risk assessments, I would like to add the following. The learnings of the risk assessments will be used for the development of prescriptive ruling. And the risk assessments, as we know, they are always led by a facilitator with all partners available. So it's, in my opinion, a requirement for a consistent and honest approach during the risk assessment to have a good risk-based design. And it's crucial that all partners around the table are convinced that they have used all their knowledge to come to a safe design. Because failing to achieve a safe design during the risk assessment could result in accidents. And this could jeopardize the new technologies with alternative fuels to proceed in further materialization. So we all have a role to play, but in this case, with the new alternatives, we need to consider all the risks very carefully, that we give these alternatives the possibility to further mature. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for your very extensive answer. So I definitely note that this is all new technology. This is alternative fuels. Is a new technology. It requires a learning curve. So we should learn from the experience gained and looking forward to these new technologies. A good quality risk-based design is from great importance. And that is indeed a challenge to maintain the quality aspect of this risk-based design. Thank you. Thank you. I'm moving. I will ask the same question to Mr. Martial Claude-Pierre. If you would like to address as well the same question, how the classification society, in particular yours, see the role and challenges in the future deployment of alternative fuels.
Thank you very much for this interesting question. How we see our role in Bureau Veritas, maybe the key word is delivering trust. So we would like to deliver trust that endeavors a new technology to be and to meet the performance required. It is of course done as previously mentioned on associated risk identification. So the risk approach is fundamental in alternative design assessment, and of course we place ourselves as a solution maker in order to mitigate or to eliminate the risks that are addressed in this approach. But we see also that our work should allow the development of new class rules when necessary. We have identified many places where there are missing rules or very light rules that need to be consolidated. And so in that view, yes, we want to deliver new class rules when necessary. And at the same time, in parallel, we want to support the development of regulation at international or national level. So yes, we don't want, let's say, to be the one who identify the best fuel. We think we have our own idea, of course, but we think it is not our role. Our role is to help stakeholders to make their decision. Again, their best operational decision should be based on our technical insights that we provide to them on this risk approach. So how can I say, yes, again, I would like to just to conclude that we will continue to support and to help identifying the best propulsion on fuel design, the best solution. But again, we don't want to limit that to the fuel, I would say, world. We want also to say that there are different solutions, and if I may, I would like also to, again, nominate the wind propulsion system as a very straightforward solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Martial, for sharing your vision. So it's clearly that the role of an RO is particularly the solution maker without specifying specifically would be a fuel of an alternative fuel in the strict word thing. But also important the role as not only developing new classification rules which fill a certain gap which exists at present, but also support the international level on statutory rules. That is also a very clear role, which the ROs are playing an important role and can contribute to the IMO, for example. That leads me to the slowly to the end of our webinar, which unfortunately passes by very quickly. So now I'm going to provide a bit of a closing summary for sharing to all the participants and a bit reflecting on what has been said during the course of the webinar and what also has been discussed later on. So dear participants, today policymakers, ship owners, engine manufacturers and recognized organizations give short views, pitches on their vision of the development of alternative zero carbon fuels for shipping. It is clear there's still a long way to go, and early movers need this maximum clarity and minimal regulatory risks in order to proceed to a larger scale. Will the solution be hydrogen, ammonia, both, or something else? We also heard different options as well, apart from the purely fuel. Nobody really can answer that question. We do know that we will pass through a transitional phase. We should take into account this transitional phase in our regulatory considerations and provide necessary flexibility for alternative solutions. IMO has experience with goal-based standards. A risk-based approach will still be needed if we want to reach our destination of zero greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, we have to safeguard the level playing field and harmonize the development and application of alternative fuels as much as possible. There are a lot of boundary conditions, not in the least outside shipping, such as fuel availability, the logistical chain, that will need to be resolved. Policymakers should partner up with the industry to make this happen. International cooperation is needed to develop measures that are equitable and inclusive, that will bring us all to our final goal together. Dear participants, this brings us to the end of this webinar. I would like to thank the speakers in particular, and also you, the audience, the participants who have been a captive audience, of course. I hope you enjoyed this short webinar and found it informative and inspiring. Like our minister said, the world is looking upon us to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from shipping. We need alternative fuels to reach our goal for zero carbon emissions by 2050. The industry supports this goal and is willing to do the necessary actions and agility, but needs a clear path from international policymakers. IMO is again in a unique position to help in designing a sustainable future for shipping and needs your support in this. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you for listening.